World War One began on the 28th of July, 1914, and raged until the 11th of November, 1918, a conflict fought on multiple fronts that reshaped the world. In our previous episode, we examined the decisive clashes of the Western Front, where Germany faced France, Britain, and later the United States in brutal battles that ultimately brought about its defeat. But the Western Front was only part of the story. Across Europe and beyond, other campaigns unfolded. Germany waged an ambitious two-front war, facing Russia in the east with the support of Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, and also Britain and France in the west. The fate of the entire war hung in the balance. If Russia could be crushed, Germany and its allies might have shifted westward, with consequences that could have changed history. In this video, we turn to these other struggles, the battles beyond the Western Front, that played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of the Great War. This is World War One, the wider war. In late August 1914, Germany was executing the Schlieffen Plan to crush France within 6 weeks by striking through Belgium, then turning east to face Russia. German leaders assumed Russia would mobilize slowly. It was a vast empire with scattered armies and a poor rail network compared to Germany. On the Western Front, German forces had already defeated Belgium and were driving towards Paris with the bulk of their army. Only a single force of around 150,000 men remained behind to defend East Prussia. But on the 26th of August 1914, Germany's assumptions were shattered. Two Russian armies invaded East Prussia, one led by General Rennenkampf with 230,000 men from the northeast, and the other by General Samsonov with 150,000 from the south. Together, nearly 380,000 Russians threatened to encircle the outnumbered German defenders. If they joined forces, East Prussia would fall, and the road to Berlin could lie open. Germany faced the possibility of defeat within the first month of the war. Yet the Russians were divided. Rennenkampf and Samsonov despised each other personally after a feud in the previous Russo-Japanese War. Their armies advanced without coordination, and even worse, the Russians sent orders by unsecured radio, which was easily intercepted by the Germans. From these messages, German commanders realized Rennenkampf was moving slowly, while Samsonov advanced alone. An opportunity arose to attack one army before they could unite. On the 28th of August 1914, the Germans struck. Using railways to shift troops quickly, they encircled Samsonov's army near the forests around Tannenberg. By the 30th of August, the Russians were trapped. Around 50,000 were killed and 90,000 were taken prisoner. Only a fraction escaped. German losses were about 20,000. Rennenkampf, learning of the disaster, retreated back into Russia. The Russian invasion collapsed. Samsonov could not face the prospect of reporting such a shocking defeat to Tsar Nicholas of Russia, and shot himself soon after the battle. Tannenberg was a stunning victory. The German generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff became national heroes overnight. But even in triumph, the Eastern Front remained a drain on German resources. Troops were pulled from the west, weakening the Schlieffen Plan. Instead of a swift German victory, the war in France became bogged down into the trenches that would define the conflict. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire was called the sick man of Europe. It had lost a lot of territory, the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. Germany had no direct colonial claims on Ottoman lands, unlike Britain, France, and Russia, who all wanted part of the Middle East. They also feared Russia, who was the Ottomans' traditional enemy. Russia had supported the independence of the Balkans from Ottoman rule. The Ottomans feared that if they stayed neutral and the Allies were victorious over Germany and Austria-Hungary, then its remaining empire could be carved up by the Allies. So, on the 2nd of August 1914, just as the war began, the Ottomans secretly signed a treaty of alliance with Germany. Enver Pasha, the ambitious Ottoman Minister of War, strongly favoured Germany and believed victory could revive Ottoman power. In late October 1914, Ottoman warships, commanded largely by German officers, bombarded Russian ports in the Black Sea, which caused the Allied powers of Russia, France and Britain to declare war on the Ottoman Empire in November 1914. In December 1914, the Ottomans launched their first major offensive in the Battle of Sarikamish. Sarikamish is a small town in the Caucasus Mountains in what is now eastern Turkey. It is surrounded by dense pine forests and snowy mountain passes. In winter 1914, temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Celsius. Sarikamish was a key railway town for the Russians. If the Ottomans seized it, they could cut off Russian supply lines in the Caucasus and provide a pathway into Russia. Enver Pasha, the Ottoman military commander, believed speed and surprise would overcome the Russian army in this region. He planned a grand flanking maneuver through the mountains to surround the Russians at Sarikamish. But he underestimated the terrain and weather conditions, and overestimated his army's ability. An army of 90,000 Ottomans entered the mountains to face off against an army of 60,000 Russians, so they had the number advantage. However, the Ottoman army was poorly equipped for the harsh winter weather, wearing light wool uniforms, and many without proper boots. Many divisions simply froze to death before even reaching the town. Only about 15,000 troops made it to Sarikamish in early January 1915. The survivors of the army tried to storm the town, but they were tired, frostbitten, and many lacked rifles. The Russians held firm, and further reinforcements arrived by rail. The result was a crushing Ottoman defeat. Only a few thousand troops made it out alive. They had pretty much lost an entire army of 90,000 men. The Russians also lost around 25,000 troops, nearly half its army, as they also struggled with the wintry mountainous conditions. So this wasn't a decisive victory, but a victory nonetheless. The Dardanelles is a narrow strait in northwest Turkey which gave access to Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. It was vital for shipping, and controlling it meant cutting off Constantinople and providing a direct supply route into Russia. The Gallipoli Peninsula is a narrow, rugged peninsula in northwestern Turkey. The long, steep cliffs, deep gullies, and hills made an amphibious assault extremely difficult. It naturally favoured defenders. If the Allies captured the Dardanelles, they could bypass Ottoman and German blockades and keep Russia supplied, and also seize control of Constantinople, which would knock the Ottomans out of the war, which meant Russia could apply more pressure on Germany, which could allow a breakthrough for Britain and France on the Western Front. The Ottomans already suffered a huge defeat in the Battle of Sarikamish and were on the back foot. And so the Gallipoli campaign began, with a naval assault in February 1915, as Allied warships tried to force their way through the Dardanelles. However, they were stopped by Ottoman shore guns and devastating sea-based minefields, sinking many battleships. The Allies had realized that it would not be possible to seize the strait by ships alone. British, French, and troops from Australia and New Zealand, known as Anzacs, launched amphibious landings on the Gallipoli Peninsula on the 25th of April 1915, storming beaches like Cape Helles and the Anzac Cove. They expected a quick victory, but were met with fierce resistance from Ottoman forces led by Mustafa Kemal. Just like on the Western Front, both sides began digging trenches into the rugged cliffs and gullies of Gallipoli. Disease, heat, poor sanitation, and flies made life hell for both sides. Every Allied attempt to break through ended in failure, and both sides were locked into a stalemate by mid-1915. By late 1915, the Allies decided to withdraw their forces, since they needed to reinforce the Western Front against Germany, and progress here was too slow. Both sides lost roughly 250,000 soldiers. This was a stunning victory for the Ottomans, making their military commander, Mustafa Kemal, a national hero, setting him on the path to founding modern-day Turkey. For Australia and New Zealand, Gallipoli became a defining national memory. Anzac Day is still commemorated each year. The Ottomans were firmly back in the war. Italy was historically a member of the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war. When the war broke out in 1914, Italy refused to join. They claimed their alliance was defensive and Austria-Hungary was the aggressor, so they would not fight alongside them. The allies of Britain, France and Russia saw an opportunity to recruit Italy on their side of the war. They promised Italy territorial gains in areas controlled by Austria-Hungary that were strategically valuable, or housed Italian-speaking people such as South Tyrol, Trentino, Istria, and the Dalmatian coast. This gave Italy an opportunity to expand its influence and unify what it saw as Italian lands. Italy signed the Treaty of London in April 1915 with Britain, France and Russia, which would guarantee them the territories promised by the Allies should they win the war. On the 23rd of May 1915, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary, breaking their earlier pact and officially joining the Allies in the war. By mid-1916, the war on the Eastern Front had stagnated. Russia had suffered a crushing defeat to the Germans at Tannenberg and lost half its army in the Battle of Sarikamish. Morale amongst the Russians was low. General Alexei Brusilov, commander of the Russian Southwestern Front, planned a bold offensive to break Austro-Hungarian lines and relieve pressure on the Allies, who were fighting the Germans at Verdun and the Somme. By 1916, most offensives on the eastern and western fronts were mass frontal assaults, waves of soldiers that charged heavily defended trenches. These tactics caused huge casualties and often failed to break lines. Brusilov realized that a new approach was needed to penetrate Austro-Hungarian defenses, and so he used surprised infiltration tactics. Instead of facing the enemy strong points head-on, he scouted the Austro-Hungarian trenches to find lightly defended areas and concentrated troops there of around 10 to 20 men. These troops would quietly approach the weak areas at night, cutting the enemy barbed wire, which left gaps for small assault groups. The Russians then attacked all these weak points simultaneously, creating widespread confusion for the Austro-Hungarians. Once inside enemy lines, the Russians would sabotage communications by cutting telephone wires and signaling lines, and they would also attack artillery and gun positions from behind, which led to them capturing key positions, preventing reinforcements from stabilizing the line. This caused the Austro-Hungarian units to panic, surrender or retreat, leaving large gaps in the fronts. This allowed Russia to break through the Austro-Hungarian front along a wide area instead of one single point. Austro-Hungarian defences collapsed in sectors, making it impossible for them to mount an effective counterattack. This massive tactical surprise led to the capture of prisoners and artillery. In total, Austria-Hungary sustained a staggering 1.5 million casualties. This was catastrophic for Austria-Hungary, destroying their morale and intensified internal ethnic tensions amongst Czechs, Slovaks, and South Slavs. This defeat meant Austria-Hungary had to call in reinforcements from Germany, who were already fighting a bloody war on the Western Front with Britain and France. Brusilov's success contributed to the perception that Austria-Hungary was a faltering power reliant on Germany, undermining its prestige. Austria managed to hold on to key positions with the help of Germany, but were badly weakened. After Italy entered the war in May 1915, they aimed to capture South Tyrol, Trentino, and strategic Austrian positions. The Italian front ran along the Alps and the Isonzo River in northeast Italy, which were full of rugged mountains, narrow valleys and rivers, which made large-scale movement extremely difficult. Italy launched a series of offensives along the Isonzo River. Unlike Brusilov's innovative tactics, Italian attacks were mostly frontal assaults over narrow valleys, often at high human cost. The Italians relied heavily on artillery bombardments, followed by infantry waves charging uphill. By 1916, Italy had conducted four major Isonzo battles. The territorial gains were minimal, mostly a few hills that were often lost in counterattacks. The offensives trained Italian manpower and created a warfare of attrition, similar to the Western Front, but in extreme alpine conditions. The result was that Austria-Hungary successfully held its defensive positions, preventing Italy from seizing strategic valleys or passes. No strategic breakthrough was achieved. Italy's repeated failures highlighted the difficulty of mountain warfare, where geography could outweigh numbers or firepower. By 1917, Italy had fought 12 costly Isonzo battles, gaining little while suffering huge casualties of roughly 600,000 men, with the Austrians losing roughly 300,000 troops. By 1917, Russia had been at war for nearly 3 years. Morale was low, food shortages were widespread, and the Tsarist government was failing to manage the war effort or domestic unrest. The Brusilov offensive had temporarily boosted morale, but heavy losses and a continued stalemate on the Eastern Front had left the army exhausted. After the February Russian Revolution of 1917, Alexander Kerensky became head of the provisional government that took power. He wanted to revive Russian morale and honor by attacking Austria-Hungary again on the Eastern Front. However, the offensive was a disaster. The war had broken Russian morale. Many soldiers were disillusioned with the war effort and were sympathetic to Bolshevik revolutionary ideas. There were widespread refusals to obey orders, and entire units even refused to advance. Within weeks, the offensive collapsed completely, leaving Russian forces in disarray. A second revolution was brewing in Russia, and the Bolsheviks eventually seized power in late 1917, promising an end to the war. In 1918, Russia signed a peace agreement with Germany, giving up much of its lands, and ceased being a military threat on the Eastern Front. By 1917, Italy had fought 12 costly Isonzo battles, gaining little while suffering huge casualties of roughly 600,000 men. Morale among Italian troops was extremely low, and leadership was criticized for repeated frontal assaults. Austria-Hungary, reinforced by German divisions, prepared a decisive counter-offensive after successfully defending the line at the Isonzo River. Austro-Hungarian and German forces used stormtrooper infiltration tactics, similar to what Germany had developed on the Western Front after they witnessed the success of the Brusilov offensive. Weak points in Italian lines were identified and penetrated swiftly, bypassing strong points. The use of poison gas, artillery bombardments, and coordinated attacks created panic and confusion in the Italian lines, and they collapsed almost immediately. Around 275,000 Italian soldiers were taken prisoner or killed, and thousands more deserted their lines. Austria-Hungary and Germany advanced roughly 100 kilometers into Italian territory, reaching the Piave River. Italian high command was shocked and morale was devastated. Britain and France sent reinforcements to defend the Piave River to prevent an Italian collapse. The Battle of Caporetto brought Italy to the brink of defeat, but they eventually managed to stabilize the front against the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary with help from France and Britain. By late 1917, Russia had effectively exited organized warfare. Their army was in chaos, the provisional government had fallen, and the Bolsheviks were negotiating peace. Germany and Austria-Hungary wanted to exploit the vacuum and push deep into Russian territory before a formal treaty was signed. The more land they conquered, the better the peace deal they could achieve with the Russians. The operation was a resounding success. German forces advanced rapidly with almost no organized resistance. Troops moved hundreds of kilometers in weeks, taking towns and railway hubs almost unopposed. The advance forced the Bolsheviks to accept harsh terms, leading directly to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, March 1918. Germany gained control of Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, and parts of Poland. This victory also freed up hundreds of thousands of troops for its 1918 spring offensive on the Western Front. By 1918, the Ottoman Empire had been battered by years of fighting, losing hundreds of thousands of troops at Gallipoli, Sarikamish, and Middle Eastern battles. The Germans had shifted resources west after the Eastern Front had collapsed, leaving the Ottomans to conduct campaigns largely on their own. Ottoman leadership wanted to regain prestige, secure eastern borders, and protect vital territories in Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and the Sinai-Palestine region. However, in reality, they only achieved limited territorial gains. They still struggled with the mountainous terrains of the Caucasus and faced resistance in the Middle East from British Commonwealth troops, where the desert environment favoured the defenders. Ottoman forces were exhausted, undersupplied, and increasingly reliant on German advisors. Though they tried to push east in 1918, Ottoman forces were stopped not by a single army, but by the harsh mountains, stretched supply lines, and determined local and allied resistance. Ambitions to regain lost lands faltered under the weight of geography and exhaustion. Allied advances, especially British forces in Palestine and Mesopotamia, left the Ottomans with no realistic chance to continue the war. The empire could not replace lost manpower or material, nor could it mount a sustained defence across its vast territory. It was also clear that its key allies of Germany and Austria-Hungary were losing the war. Therefore, on the 30th of October 1918, the Ottomans signed the Armistice of Mudros, ending their participation in the war. The surrender gave the Allies occupation rights over strategic Ottoman territories and effectively ended Ottoman sovereignty over most of its empire. It paved the way for post-war partitioning of the empire under the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920. This armistice marked the start of the empire's final collapse, eventually leading to the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. After the huge defeat at Caporetto in late 1917, the Italian army was rebuilt under General Armando Diaz. Defensive lines were reorganized along the Piave River, using fortified positions, artillery, and trenches to prevent another breakthrough. Morale and discipline improved, aided by French and British advisors and reinforcements. In June 1918, Austro-Hungarian forces launched an attack across the Piave River, hoping to break Italian lines like they did before and force Italy out of the war. However, Italian defences held firm. Austro-Hungarian troops suffered heavy casualties and were unable to cross the river decisively. This marked the last major Austro-Hungarian offensive on the Italian front. Italy regained confidence and morale. After their victory over the Austro-Hungarian forces at the Piave River, Italy launched a general offensive along the entire front. They combined artillery barrages, infantry assaults, infiltration tactics, and coordinated British and French forces. This led to the total collapse of Austro-Hungarian lines. Thousands of soldiers were captured, and the army disintegrated in the face of advancing Italians. Italian forces advanced hundreds of kilometers, recapturing lost territory in Caporetto. Austria-Hungary sought an armistice on the 3rd of November 1918. The war in Italy was officially over, and the Austria-Hungary Empire was on the brink of collapse. Austria-Hungary Empire was a patchwork of ethnic groups, including Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Croats, Slovenes, South Slavs, Hungarians, and Italians. War losses and shortages intensified nationalist movements, which demanded independence. By October to November 1918, Czechoslovakia declared independence. Hungarians re-established an independent Hungary, and South Slavic regions proclaimed the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. With no effective army or loyal government, Austria-Hungary Emperor Karl I abdicated in November 1918, effectively ending the empire. Italy's prestige and territorial ambitions were largely fulfilled under the Treaty of Saint-Germain in 1919, where it gained South Tyrol, Trentino Alto, and the Istrian Peninsula, and part of the Dalmatian Islands from Austria-Hungary. The Austria-Hungary Empire had fallen and was gone forever, leaving Germany to fight the war alone. By late 1918, World War I had left Europe transformed. Russia had collapsed after the 1917 revolution, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk signed with Germany. Austria-Hungary had disintegrated into multiple successor states, and their emperor Karl I had abdicated. And the Ottoman Empire failed to advance east after Russia's exit, and were pushed back in the Middle East by British Commonwealth forces, leading to their surrender. By late 1918, three empires, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans, had vanished. Germany stood alone, facing the full might of the Allies on the Western Front. Exhausted armies, starving civilians, and political upheaval spelled the end of the war. On the 11th of November, the guns fell silent, and the war that had reshaped the world was finally over.